in today's show. I'm going to be joined by Mitch Casey of the Ball Boys, and we're going to be talking about the 2022 NBA draft and comparing it to 2021. Michael Bolton, he's going to sit in like a real creep.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we're available on all platforms. Yesterday, we went through some prospects with Ben Pfeiffer. I encourage you to go check that show out. Today, with Mitch Casey, we're going to be looking at guys, sort of similar players, similar positions, and comparing and contrasting them between 2021 and 2022. Warnie?
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right, so here he is, back on the show. Mitch Casey, welcome back.
Thanks, Josh. Good to be back on the show, mate. Talking NBA draft this time.
Yeah, a bit of a different spin on things as to what we did last time before last season. We're going to be talking NBA draft, and we're not just talking 2022. We're going to compare and contrast guys between the 2022 class and the 2021 class. Some ideas that we have on these guys, how they differ. Just as often you'll get comparisons based on position or size or play type or anything like that. So we've got 6 little comparisons here that we are going to go through. We don't need to waste any more time. We'll plug all your stuff later on. We'll talk about where you can find Mitch. You can see it on the screen here already on YouTube, and you already know Mitch. But let's talk the first guy that we're going to talk about here, and that is, well, the first guys, and that is a couple of big men. Chet Holmgren and Evan Mobley. 2 7-footers, a little bit on the thin side. Obviously, Chet is a lot thinner than what Evan is. Both really good defensive upside with, defensive value probably right now with some offensive upside. Mobley went 3. I thought he should have been Rookie of the Year. He ended up second in that vote. I thought he should have been pick 2. Chet's probably going to be pick 2 in the draft this year. So we're comparing 4s and 5s, 7-footers together. What's the major difference, do you think, between these two players?
So I think they're both very unique prospects. Obviously, the word unicorn gets thrown around a lot in the NBA these days, but I think that these are probably 2 very appropriate uses of the words. I think that the biggest difference in my eyes is the ability to guard in space. On the perimeter, I definitely would favor someone like a Mobley and the foot speed, and probably the handle with Mobley. I'm a little bit more confident in versus I think I'm much more confident with the shot of Chet Holmgren over Evan Mobley at this stage. I think he's demonstrated at the high school level and at the college level. He's really good on that trailing 3, really good at that as that spot up. He's probably comparing the stats at college, he's much more efficient. And I think that there's a bit of offensive upside on Chet's side of the ball versus Mobley. But I think if we're comparing the two and saying who would you rather, me personally, I think I just value the defensive versatility of Mobley a little bit higher and have a bit more confidence that he's not going to get played off the court in like an NBA playoff kind of setting with the switching in the NBA currently. But 2 very good prospects in my mind. And in fact, I have Chet number 1 on my big board, but I think that they're both pretty close at this stage.
I have Chet number 1 also on mine. I don't think there's really any danger of Chet being defensively played off the court. I know that there's the size thing, but people can put on weight. But I also think that, yes, I do agree that Mobley's defensive ability, because we've seen it in the NBA, it was already amazing, right? But I think if you had viewed Mobley before we hit the NBA draft, you wouldn't have said, well, his defense is significantly better than Chet's necessarily. But we saw him do it at the NBA level, so it does give him a plus there. But I don't think that Chet is going to be killed in switches. I think he can actually guard.
I don't think so either, to be clear. I just think that the foot speed is definitely, even if you look back at the tape at the college level, Mobley's foot speed was definitely noticeably faster than Chet's, and that's my only concern. But in saying that, I don't think he's going to get played off the court. I think he's just going to play a different style of defense. He's going to be a bit more in drop versus a little bit less switching, which, you just build your defense around that, and it's up to the coach to get the most out of that. So, yeah, just to be clear there.
I think Chet is a better rim protector than what Mobley is, significantly. In terms of passing, I don't know where they sit offensively. I think they both have some upside to become pretty solid passers. Chet maybe has the edge now, but I'm not sure with that one, and I agree with you. I agree with you on the shooting. Now, Chet is a guy that I've been high on for like 2-3 years. Like, I've heard about him. I watched literal high school games of this guy play, which you don't do for everybody. Like, you watch certain players from that age and go, okay, well, I've heard about this guy. I know what he's going to bring. Mobley wasn't one of those players, even though I was pretty high on him last year and had him clearly at number 2 as we headed into the draft. If I had to take it again, I probably would take Chet over Mobley. I think that upside is a little bit higher, but it's very hard to discount what I've seen from Mobley. Like, I've already seen all NBA, all defense level play. Like, I've already seen that. And Chet might not ever get to that level. So that's hard to discount. But again, some of my priors on there with Chet make me think there is more offensive upside, more rim protection. If they can merge together, I think we have a prospect that's just a smidge better than what Mobley can become. But it's pretty close to me. And I think that's how we look at that. Now, do you think that for both of these guys, they are long-term 4s? We saw Mobley play at the 4 a lot this year. Chet's probably going to have to start at the 4. Or do you think in time they both can become full-time centers?
I think for both of them, their best position is center. I know that people get really concerned about their size and their weights and things like that. But for me, I think that's all overblown. The NBA is different these days. And sure, you can say they're going to struggle guarding players like Jokic and Embiid, but everyone struggles guarding Jokic and Embiid. So, I think that their defensive versatility, their floor spacing that they could potentially provide is probably most valuable at the 5. So I see them definitely long-term being best at that position. And, you've got players coming through, like, obviously Mobley and Chet, if they're both, 5s in there, say the Magic take them at number 1, then they're guarding each other at the 5. You've got the guy from France coming through as maybe the number 1 pick next year, who's going to be a skinny 7 foot. Yeah, Wembanyama, who's, so there's size and physical strength is less important in my eyes, and the fact that they will have the ability to put on mass as they grow into their bodies, it just presents even more upside in my opinion. So I'm not too concerned. I think long term I view them as 5s.
I think that's basically exactly the way that I feel about those guys. But I'll tell you what else I feel pretty strongly about, and that is Sakara, because we all know that feeling your best and being your best, part of that is nutrition and getting the right meals into your body with the right nutrition. And Sakara is here for you. It is time, according to Sakara, to seek wellness, to seek joy, and to seek abundance in all areas of your life. That sounds a little wanky, but Sakara's not. It is a fantastic meal and nutrition-based program. It's a wellness company anchored in food as medicine, on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. The nutritionally designed, chef-crafted breakfasts, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door, ready to eat. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockedon20, or you enter the code lockedon20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockedon20. You get 20% off your first order, sakara.com/lockedon20. All right, let's go to another couple of big men here, Mitchie. And we're talking about Jalen Duren, center out of Memphis, and of course, old mate, the delicate dancer, Alperen Sengun, Houston Rockets big man, who all of us across the fantasy spectrum were pretty excited to see him get some minutes. It didn't happen until right at the end of the year. But how do we view these two? I thought Sengun was criminally underdrafted in last year's draft. I would have had him top 6, top 5 probably in that draft. Duren is probably going to fall outside the top 10, but end up being a higher pick than what Sengun was in the lottery. I think that, to me, this one's pretty clear. I don't know. We haven't discussed which way we sort of sit on these two. To me, this one is clear. I think Sengun is the better prospect between these two. There's a lot more offensively. He's got a lot of good defensive markers as well. I think there's a little bit more, well, there's definitely more shooting upside in Sengun. There's more passing upside in Sengun. Duren is a little bit bigger, probably a little bit better defensively, but I'm not sure it's going to be that much of a difference. And if I had to choose the two head-to-head, I would pretty clearly, at this point, take Sengun. What would you say between these two?
I think they're very different prospects. I think whilst I do agree with you that the upside of Sengun is higher, I mean, we're talking like you compare the stats of, a Nikola Jokic and Sengun in their rookie seasons, they're actually remarkably similar. But for me, I worry about the play style of Sengun and how successful that kind of play style can be in the NBA when we're talking about championship level contenders. So for me, I see the ability for Duren to fit inside a championship level team, a bit of a smoother fit. I'm someone, when I'm evaluating prospects, I always sort of favor the defensive side of the floor, especially when it comes to my big guys. I don't know if I want my offense running through a player like Sengun unless he develops into a truly elite level offensive threat. And I have my doubts about that. I love his fantasy translation and I value him much higher in that regard. But when it comes to real life NBA impact, I don't know. I'm a bit closer to you, and I think I actually would even favor the Duren side of things just because I do see a little bit of upside on the offensive. I see some passing instincts that I like. And I just much prefer him as a lob threat and as a defensively versatile big man, which I guess is just my preference for how I'd be constructing my roster. But that's, again, it's more of a preference thing.
I agree. Lob threat wise, yes. All right, he's clearly better Duren than Sengun. I don't have any debate with that. Rim protection probably is better, but I wouldn't. Shingun's not a bad rim protector. He's actually pretty good. And I think defensively, he is hurt a little bit by the European big man stereotype of, you're going to get cooked because you're a European defensive big man. That's standard thing. When I don't necessarily think that's true. I think his positioning's really good. His hands are really good. He's not a bad rim protector. And while you talk about, the level of getting to the playoffs and success there, is Duren a guy that you can rely upon to play 30 minutes? Or is he going to be a guy that has to end up playing 22 minutes, 23 minutes on a good team as like sort of an in-between backup-y sort of big man versus a guy like if Sengun does develop that he can become a full-time starter because he can work on both ends of the court, whereas I worry a little bit about Duren's ability. I think he can still do it, but at the extra size that he has, can he switch out there? Can he actually get played off the court because he's not bringing enough offensively and then having some of those defensive issues at the highest levels?
Yeah, I think it depends on like the matchup, I guess. Like if you look at someone like a Robert Williams in these playoffs, he's someone who you would consider like, obviously he's not a great defender in space, but he's been able to play significant minutes and be a huge impact for the Boston Celtics. And it might even come down to which conference you're drafted in. So like, in the Eastern Conference, there seems to be at the moment with the teams in there, and obviously this will evolve, but there seems to be a bit more value with those big guys when you're coming up against a Joel Embiid, if you're coming up against a Milwaukee and a Giannis. So those guys have a bit more impact on that conference, again, at this stage, versus the West when you're going against the Warriors or the Dallas Mavericks and things like that. Those players tend to get played off the court a little bit more. So it's hard for me to project too far into their careers from that perspective, but I do think that he can have a similar impact to someone like a Robert Williams, and we can see him being impactful in the playoffs at the moment. So for me, I would say that, he can definitely still be a top 6 or 7 rotation player in a very good team, and for me, that's enough for me to sort of take the punt on his upside.
Yeah, I can see the Robert Williams thing. That does make a lot of sense to me. He's also a guy, Duren, who's really young. Sengun was really young last year as well, and Duren is like the youngest player, I think, in this draft class. So they've both got that on their side in terms of when you're drafting them. I can easily see that argument for Duren as being just that better defender, and if it does work and he can stay on the court, then that value is really high, and Sengun might not hit the upside that I think he does have. But it is an interesting debate nonetheless, and we'll see how those guys end up. We'll see where Duren ends up, because you're right, fit is going to be important to see how these guys do work. But if you want the fit of the number one source for all of your betting info and stats, BetOnline. It's clearly the place. You can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including the NBA Finals, which we've got Game 3 coming up in a couple of days, actually tomorrow. The NHL Hockey Conference Finals, which could be over some of those by then. Major League Baseball, fighting news, MMA, UFC, boxing, all of that stuff. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Let's do the lazy one. Let's do the Aussie point guard, big point guard players, Josh Giddey and Dyson Daniels, who at first glance you go, okay, they're 6'7", 6'8", Australian guys who can pass. And that is all true, Mitch. Except, actually, let's try again. They're both 6'7", 6'8" Aussie guys who can pass and can't shoot. But one of them is a much better passer, and one of them is a very good defender. Daniels being the defender, Giddey being the very good passer. And that's the similarities, I guess, end at nationality, height, really. Like they're going to be always grouped together, and that's why I put them together. But there are significant differences between the two. Now, I don't know how you viewed Giddey before last year's draft. I actually had him at 6 in last year's draft.
6, I think, as well.
Yeah, so we were much higher on him than consensus, and I think that worked out in our favour as to how he played this season. I've got Daniels at 8 at the moment with his defensive ability. I'm a little bit worried offensively because Giddey couldn't shoot, but he had all of that creation ability where Daniels doesn't have that same level of vision and passing. But defensively, he's right there. He could come in and have a defensive impact. Yeah, he's not saying that he's Scotty Barnes or Herb Jones, but we've seen defenders come in and be able to have impacts as rookies last year a lot. And I think Daniels could do that. So to me, I still do value as a guy who's a guard, having that playmaking and creation ability for others probably a little bit higher than the defensive stuff that Daniels brings. So I probably would have Giddey just a little bit above him, but I have probably the same lack of faith in both of their shooting abilities. Maybe Daniels slightly higher. How are you viewing these two players?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Shout out to the Aussies, though, for being the high IQ passers that they are. I think that, again, it comes down to fit. I've got Dyson Daniels as my 6th ranked prospect in this draft. Okay. And in some circumstances, I could even see him going as high as 5, depending on your views on Sharp. But I think that depending on the fit, like if I'm a New Orleans Pelicans, I think that that's a perfect place for him to go. We've seen them develop shots like Herb Jones and even Alonzo Ball in the past. Alonzo Ball is actually a really good comparison that I have for Dyson Daniels. I can see that versatility and that switching ability on defense. And whilst he's not as good a passer as Josh Giddey, he doesn't have that cerebral kind of passer guy open kind of ability. He is someone who can he's a ball mover. He's someone that can run the point guard. He can be a 2 guard. He can kind of fit in amongst a lot of different teams. So from a versatility point of view, I lean Daniels, but from an upside point of view, I think Josh Giddey definitely has a higher upside. And if you're looking for someone who could be an all-star or be potentially like a, second or third best player on a championship team, then Giddey will definitely have that. I don't necessarily see all-star potential from Dyson Daniels. I just think he's a really good starting level player that will contribute to winning basketball. And so depending on where you are in the draft and what you're looking for, that's sort of the way I see both these players. But I guess if you're thinking overall upside, I think I'm definitely on the Giddey side of things with his ability to pass people open and run the offense a bit more on his own.
What if both of these guys could hit 36% of their threes? Like, which one do you value more, the shooting and passing of Giddey or the shooting and defense, the 3 and D of Dyson Daniels?
I think the Giddey side of things, just because that he can really become a big offensive threat, and his defensive lacking, like his ability to lack on defense, is covered up by the fact that he's 6'7". Like, if you're big enough, even if you're not the best defender, you've got the ability to switch on to bigger guys. You can maybe hide him on a lesser potent offensive threat. And I'm just not worried about his size, like a Kemba Walker being just bullied in the post and mismatched crazily. So I'd lean Giddey that way.
I agree. And we've seen guys like Devin Booker. We've seen guys like Zach LaVine who are horrendous defenders early in their career. Their teams got better. They got more experienced. They have that size and length as well. They're not good defenders by it. They will never have good defensive prospects or no good defensive tape early on. But now they are averaged, and sometimes you might even say Devin Booker's an above average defender. The size helps, the experience helps, and playing on a better team helps those guys out a lot. And you can see that same sort of trajectory, I guess, for Giddey as he plays 3, 4, 5 years in the league. The Thunder become a good team, and that length starts to translate. He gets more experience. He plays the angles. He's already got the IQ. Playing the angles with that length, I can see that. I would have Giddey over Daniels as well, because I do value that passing ability. But let's go completely defense here, really, and talk about a guy that you just referenced, and that's Herb Jones for the New Orleans Pelicans, and a guy who I'm pretty high on in this draft. I'm not sure what's going to happen with his offensive stuff, and that is the forward Jeremy Sochan out of Baylor. Really good defensive player already. Now, of course, Jones was picked in the second round, but if we did a redraft, he would not be. He's
going higher.
He's also a lot older, though, Jones. I think he's like 22 rookie year, whereas Sochan's going to be 19. And we saw Jones' shot develop into being from a horrendous... I think I heard someone say he shot 7% as a freshman in college from 3.
It was pretty bad.
Herb Jones, and then like 29% as a senior or something, or junior, whatever it was. Where Sochan has got a lot of work to do offensively, probably not quite as much as what Herb did, but Jones's defensive ability was elite, and it translated across to the NBA as elite. Now, we have seen Jones be an elite defender already at the NBA level. I worry a little bit, Mitch, about Jones's upside. Like, we saw him play 29 minutes a night this season, really good, but is there a little bit of the thigh ball factor, is that the offense will never be actually good enough to play those big minutes? And play 35, 36 and become even like an average offensive player, even though he was like a horrible offensive player to become a below average one. I'm not sure if he can actually take that further. I think Sochan's got the ability to maybe become an average offensive player, but me seeing Jones do it and do it at that level, as much as I like Sochan, I might actually take Herb. But the age, I'm torn. I want to hear I want to hear your thoughts before I make my final call, but I'm torn on this. I'm leaning marginally towards Jones, but the 3-year age gap and the perhaps offensive upside, a little bit of Sochan, is making me doubt it.
It's a difficult one. Obviously, we're comparing players that, well, one we haven't seen in the NBA system and one we have. There's I think like a 3 or 4 year difference in age. So my initial instinct is to definitely say that Sochan has the upside. He's bigger. He probably has more versatility in terms of guarding, 4s and 5s than a Herb Jones, which you could probably say is more valuable. Like he could be definitely a small ball 5 in some lineups.
Yep.
Hence the comparisons to a Draymond Green, which I think, by the way, need to stop. Can we stop comparing everyone to one of the best defensive players of our generation?
The other one you get is like, he's a wing who's really good defensively but can't shoot, so maybe he turns into Kawhi Leonard. Like, it just doesn't happen. Like, it happened to Kawhi Leonard because Kawhi Leonard was Kawhi Leonard, and that's why it's so remarkable. But, Patrick Williams and Isaac Okoro and Jeremy Sochan, they're not Kawhi Leonard. Maybe they become good, but Jesus, like, we can't expect that. And it's the same with, hey, this guy's a little bit, like, sort of chunky and short, but a good rim protector. So is he Draymond? Like, of course he's not. No.
Yeah.
Nobody is.
I think I'd be really interested to see where Sochan goes and what team he ends up on. Like, if he ends up on, like, an OKC at 12 or even a say like a New Orleans, say they don't get a Dyson Daniels, like some of those teams that have the ability to develop their talent a bit better, I would hate to see him go to like a Knicks, for example. Something like that. It would definitely dramatically change my view on what Sochan can become. So at this stage, I'm leaning Sochan for the upside. I feel like Herb Jones may have maybe not topped out in terms of his value, but I don't see that much more growth potential from him on the offensive side of the floor. He's a great wing defender, but in terms of his ability to impact the entire court, switching onto bigs and things like that, I don't think he has the upside that Sochan does. In saying that, Sochan, he shot 29% from 3 in his college season, low volume, obviously. Herb Jones shot 35% in his final year, but like you referenced before, the year before that, he did shoot 7%. So, maybe if you take into account growth and maybe the two kind of correlate, maybe you can see a big jump from Sochan. It's really tough to tell, but I'm going to lean the upside and the youth of Sochan over Jones.
Yeah, like I've got Sochan like at 6 or 7 on my board, or somewhere in that range anyway. And I think still, though, I might take Herb because getting that level of defense it's really hard to say, well, someone might get to that level because they don't.
Theoretical.
Like this is like a top 10 to 12 defensive player in the NBA already. And the 3-year age gap gives me pause. The offensive limitations of Jones, even though he improved a lot, again, like you, I'm not sure how much further it goes. I think I still will take Herb Jones here. But let's really flip it now and go from defense to offense. And let's talk about Jaden Ivey versus Jalen Green. Two explosive, athletic guards who have some struggles defensively at times, especially Green. And you hope that they can develop into these. I think Green probably is, real well on his way there. These athletic number one scorer types who can handle the ball and become combo guards. Ivey's probably more combo guard than shooting guard at this point. Green probably can get there. I would say at this point I have Green pretty firmly above where Ivey is, but yeah, Ivey could very easily. I think they could actually work together, and I picked Ivey at 3 in my mock draft a couple of days ago. I have Green ahead slightly, but I don't think it's that big of a gap.
Yeah, I don't think it's that big of a gap either. I'm a big Ivey fan. I didn't know you drafted him to 3 at Houston because I love that. I was tempted to do that in our first mock draft that we did because I don't like the fit of a Paolo Mancaro next to a Sengun on that team. And I'd love to see Jaden Ivey at least trialed at a point guard position because I think that, my closest comparison to him is someone like a Russell Westbrook. He's got that explosive ability. Maybe he hasn't played point guard at college, but I can definitely see that in him. I was a bit lower on Green last year. Lower in saying that I didn't think that he was a number 2 pick. I thought he was more like a 4. I think I had him 4 behind a Suggs and a Mobley because of the defensive concerns and because of the shot selection concerns. Now, he obviously had a season kind of not of 2 halves, but of 3 quarters and 1 quarter, where the last quarter of the season where he went crazy. How much of that was just them force-feeding him and coming up against teams that have kind of put the Q in the rack? We compare him to someone like an Anthony Edwards, who had a similar type season. It's hard for me to read on what he's going to do. I think he's probably got a higher offensive upside in terms of being like a 25 to 30 point per game scorer for his career versus Jaden Ivey, but I'm more confident that Ivey's going to be a better defender. I think I just lean Green for that upside reason, but I'm very intrigued by the experiment of Jaden Ivey being a point guard. So, say Houston does select him and play him at point over Kevin Porter Jr., I'd be very excited to see that. And I think that he has a lot of upside if he can actually become a point guard in the NBA. Yeah,
look, it is a tough one here as well. And Ivey is the better defender. I think Green is the better scorer, but Ivey's the better passer. So they've got their own strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. Obviously, look, like you, I didn't have Green at 2 last year. I had him at 3, I think. And yeah, I wasn't as big on him, and he obviously let us down. He didn't let us down, but he didn't play well for the first 70% of the season. And then you're right, some factors happened, and Eric Gordon and Schroeder and Wood were out, but he also improved in that same time. I think he'll be pretty solid next season. I think Ivey will struggle a lot this year. I think it'll be a similar trajectory, where if the first 70% of the year you probably look pretty poor, as a lot of these guards do. Darius Garland, De'Aaron Fox, these guys all look terrible in their first season in the NBA, and I think Ivey will be the same. So
if he goes to the Kings, I'm definitely I'm Team Jalen Green all the way.
Hey, that's completely fair enough, and I reckon that's probably where he's going to end up. But I do have some faith that this is a tighter battle than maybe it seems on the surface. I will lean Green, but I think Ivey's got the potential to be the number 2 player in this 2022 draft class, which is pretty high praise. Now, this last one we're going to do is an interesting one because a lot of people, not including me, were really high on James Bouknight last season. Thunder fans were crying that he didn't get picked at number 6. It's guaranteed he's going to 6. We love it. I was like, no, I don't like it. I don't want him in the top 10. I don't think he's very good. I think he's a shoot-first guy that can't do it very well and can't do really much else. And let's be fair, he was bad like all season. Had some attitude issues, had a couple of good games, but basically played in the G League all season. He is that 6'5" guard who shoots, scores, but I'm not really sure what else he's bringing. And I sort of feel the same way about Bennedict Mathurin. That's why I've compared these two here. I am not particularly high on Mathurin. He's probably a little bit stronger with a little bit more defensive upside, maybe a little bit better shot selection. And because I was so low on Bouknight last season and he somehow underperformed my low expectations, I don't really have any other option, I don't think, to go with Mathurin. Where were you on Bouknight? Were you a Bouknight believer? Are you still a Bouknight believer? And how do you compare these two?
Well, anyone who listens to our podcast knows that Bouknight's become a bit of a punching bag on our NBA draft podcasts. I think I settled in him close to the late teens last year, sort of the 20th kind of range. Mathurin, to me, in this draft is probably the back end of the lottery. I've got him and AJ Griffin kind of sliding back towards that last bit of the lottery at sort of 12, 13, 14.
Yeah, I had him at 14 yesterday, Mathurin.
Yeah, in the different drafts, obviously I think last year was a bit stronger, but I still would favor Bennedict Mathurin just because of his athletic upside. The defense, even though he hasn't really shown anything statistically great this year, he's a bit longer, at least by perception. He probably has a bit more upside there. I agree that I like his shot selection a lot better than a Bouknight. He has this perception of like a really good 3-and-D player, but without the 3 and without much D as well. Like his shooting actually isn't as good as what I think is led on to be. But I do see flashes of a good potential, a bit higher than Bouknight. So I'm pretty comfortably in the Bennedict Mathurin side of things. More so, like you, I was just never a fan of Bouknight. He kind of gets that love of people saying that he's a baller. He goes and gets buckets, which people just seem to love to throw out there. And yeah, for me, that just doesn't hold enough weight when you've got so many other deficiencies.
Yeah, especially when you get to the NBA and you're just not going to have the opportunity to get buckets because you're not good enough to have the ball in your hands. It is pretty clearly to me, Mathurin, and yeah, I think I had Bouknight at 13 or 14 last year, and that was, I feel like, too high based on the way that he played. Look, he still might become good because, as I just detailed, plenty of guards suck. Like, they're terrible to begin their NBA career. Fox, Garland, really two examples who were just dreadful for the first full season of their career. And maybe Bouknight turns it on. I doubt it, but maybe he does. I still would take Mathurin. He is a little bit bigger than Bouknight, although he's not as big as what he was officially listed at throughout the college season. I think he measured in at maybe 6'4.5". At the combo when he was like listed 6'7", 6'6" at Arizona. So he's a little bit smaller there, so it's probably not quite wing size, more guard. Probably a little bit better passing ability, but it's not particularly strong there. But his overall body size and strength, I think, does give Mathurin the advantage there over old Jimmy Bouknight.
I think he'll also translate to a better role player in the NBA. I think he's going to be someone who can actually fit what he's going to be drafted for, whereas I think the hope for Bouknight was that he turns into like your best scorer or the second best scorer on your team, and I just never saw that as a possibility. So Bennedict, I think, is going to play what you're going to draft him for.
Yep, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Mitch, that'll do it for us today. Tell everybody where they can find you, social media, and your YouTube channel and what you got going on over there.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at BallBoysNBA. You can follow us on Instagram at BallBoysFantasyBasketball. On YouTube, we are the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. So hit us up over there. We're talking a lot of fantasy once the season starts or even before the season starts. And at the moment, we're doing a lot of draft content. We've just released some versus videos where we're breaking down. We go in detail with the top 5, specifically the top 3 forwards, and then the 2 guards in Ivey and Sharp head-to-head. We've recently gone through a lot of the guards and the centers in the NBA, and coming out soon, we're going into a big chat, a lot of wings in this draft, clumping together in the lottery and then sort of mid-first round as well. So we're breaking down both myself and my co-host Callum's thoughts on that part of the draft. And then lots of fantasy stuff once the draft actually happens, and dynasty rankings, all that good stuff once we get close to the NBA season. So check us out over there.
Absolutely. Go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow Mitch and Callum over on the social medias as well. Mitch, thanks again for coming on the show and chatting NBA draft with me.
No worries, Josh. Always a pleasure.
And that'll do it for me today. Don't forget, go follow Mitch at his YouTube channel. I'm going to tag that here in the YouTube description and in the title, so go follow him there. Follow me, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. Give us a thumbs up. Leave your comments down below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.